On today's episode, we are covering the 4 goals of life, and specifically pleasure. So from our previous episode, I gave an introduction into the 4 goals of life, which are pleasure, wealth, knowledge, and liberation. And on today's episode, I'm going to specifically cover pleasure. And what is pleasure? So, as stated before, it's said to be 4 goals of life, which everyone to live a full life tries to achieve. And it's not that we knock off goals one by one, but rather that we, in every situation that we encounter, daily situations or relationships or work or everything, we are faced with an opportunity to extract the 4 goals or the 4 let's say particular benefits of life in each situation. So pleasure. And pleasure is seen as, well, let's say stimulating the senses. So we enjoy looking at things, hearing things, tasting things, enjoy certain smells, and enjoy the feel of certain things. So pleasure is multifaceted. And then in addition to that, when we experience something pleasurable, we are in a frame of mind that allows us to accept what is pleasurable. Because in the very same way that if you have something every day that you find pleasurable, and then one day you are not in the frame of mind to accept that as being pleasurable, then it's not, you don't enjoy it. And if that happens long enough, then you think, well, I need to find something else that is pleasurable because this no longer gives me pleasure. So then the question must be asked, well, what is pleasure? How do I extract pleasure from everyday activities that for some of us will seem mundane? And as an example, let's say travel. For example, travel. Those of us who travel for work tend to extract very little pleasure from traveling, whereas somebody who travels on vacation will find it a very pleasurable experience. So it's like that. Everything is like that. The first time we got a car and we were so excited to drive, and then when we become accustomed to it, it's no longer a pleasure, it's more of a task. Even eating, that if you enjoy a meal, a particular type of food, if you eat that food every day, it no longer becomes a pleasure. So it's a very simple and fine line between something being a pleasure and something no longer being pleasurable. And so I think at the base or the fundamental principle behind pleasure is it being stimulating, is it being something that we find exciting. And exciting but not dangerous. So, and this is relative to each individual's own definition of what is pleasurable. But when we seek pleasure, we are seeking to, let's say, stimulate ourselves. We are seeking activity. We are seeking to satisfy the senses. So that would mean that the senses are not engaged the rest of the time. So for example, if I eat a particular food that gives me pleasure, then, well, when I eat the other foods, it doesn't give me pleasure. So is it that I seek to make the other foods more pleasurable? And this is, well, common sense. We try to spice up. We add different spices. We try to spice up the meal. We try to arrange it in a different way so it looks more appealing. Or, we try various things in an effort to make that meal more pleasurable. But is it the food? Is it that my approach to eating is for lack of a better word, flawed. Now I'm applying this to eat. I'm using eating as an example, but I'm not applying solely to eating. Everything. If we approach something, let's say, with an expectation of a certain amount of pleasure being delivered, and then it falls short, and then we become disappointed and we say it's not pleasurable, which is the difference between experiencing something for the first time and having something that you experience regularly. Like the example about traveling, that when we approach something that's new or something that's unfamiliar to us, that gives rise to pleasure because it's something that's stimulating. The senses become active. We become, or vision, or hearing, or sense of smell, everything is put on alert because we are trying to figure out what this is, what's new about it. And this is when our senses become stimulated. We perceive it as being pleasurable. And if it's overstimulated in one way or another, it becomes unpleasurable. So, as far as applying to the goals of life, that one of the goals of life is to be satisfied, or to seek pleasure, or to enjoy things. To me, it more applies to being fully aware in the situations of our life, and so aware that we engage our senses to the maximum level that we enjoy what we are doing. So I'm not saying that we are trying to overload our senses in every activity. And it could be seen that this is what's happening in the world, that for every single activity, it must be mind-blowing. It must be something that is very stimulating. And that's why some things seem to become so mundane that they are boring, or they fail to engage our interest because it doesn't stimulate the senses. But the senses are part of the mind, or not part of the mind, but part of the faculty of the body. They work to give us feedback. They work to give us an idea of what we are experiencing. So if I train my senses, if I engage my let's say my body, which is the physical sensory organ that I use to perceive things, and also my mind, which I use to interpret and decipher the stimulants and the messages my nerves are sending to me. If I train this, then I can manage pleasure. And that's where, let's say, for example, in the education process, which is knowledge, which comes later on in our series, if I learn in my education process to manage my senses, then I have under my control the ability to extract pleasure when I want from life in every situation. And what simply sitting and staring at the sky or the clouds, that we have the ability to extract the maximum amount of stimulus from any situation because we have control of the senses. So it's not so much now that we go out seeking to be stimulated, but we can manage our stimulation. So that's what I think is the key shift in our awareness, or our discipline, or our knowledge about ourselves, is that we shift from expecting pleasure to come to us into a mode of where we can extract pleasure, or we can manage pleasure. And when we learn to do that, then every single situation we can manage that into a pleasurable one. So this is my short breakdown on one of the 4 goals of life: pleasure, or in the Sanskrit word karma, And I invite you to join me on the following episodes as we go in depth in each episode into another goal of life. So my name is Omkar, saying thank you for joining me on Diksha. And you can give us feedback on our Facebook page or on our website. And I will see you next time.